President Trump is hitting his own national security advisor, General H.R. McMaster, for saying that Russian election meddling is now incontrovertible. Overnight, the president tweeted, General McMaster forgot to say that the results of the 2016 election were not impacted or changed by the Russians, and that the only collusion was between Russia and Crooked H, the DNC, and the Dems. Remember the dirty dossier, uranium speeches, emails, and the Podesta company. Here with me is a man who led the intelligence community while this Russian operation allegedly began, former Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. Let's just start there. The president hitting his own national security advisor for not agreeing with him and actually agreeing with the grand jury indictment that was put on and pressed forward with the president's own senior officials at the Justice Department. Your reaction?
Well, first of all, the art form here and ignoring what else H.R. McMaster said. And above all this rhetoric here, again, we're losing sight of what is it we're going to do about the threat posed by the Russians. He never talks about that. It's all about himself, collusion or not. And the indictment, as was the Deputy Attorney General's statement, was very precisely and carefully worded, that the indictment itself reflected no collusion. In the same way that it acknowledged that the members of the Trump campaign were unwitting participants in this. This is not to say there weren't. And I do think there are other shoes to drop here besides this indictment, which, by the way, I think did serve to validate with a higher evidentiary bar the intelligence community assessment that was rendered in January of 2017.
Other shoes to drop
well, for example, not addressed here is potential involvement of the Russian government, which we certainly saw through intelligence channels that the government was masterminding this. I think another thing that we haven't seen much of is financial entanglements between the Trump organization before the election and then during it.
Are you confident there are financial entanglements that are
problematic? Well, I don't know.
problematic?
I'm just saying that we haven't seen much on that, and I have to think that the special counsel and his team are looking at that simply by looking at the composition of who's on that team.
I want to ask about something else the president did on Twitter this weekend. He went after the FBI for missing a call on their tip line last month from a person close to the Parkland shooter, expressing concern over, quote, the potential of him conducting a school shooting. The information was not reported to the appropriate FBI officials. No further investigation was conducted. The president blamed that on the FBI being too focused on the Russia investigation. He said, very sad that the FBI missed all of the many signals sent out by the Florida school shooter. This is not acceptable. They are spending too much time trying to prove Russian collusion with the Trump campaign. There is no collusion. Get back to the basics and make us all proud. Fair connection?
Well, no. That's at best, I think, disingenuous, because two separate things here completely. I do think what this points out, Dana, is a bigger issue, at least in my mind, which is the tremendous stress and pressure that's put on sort of the rest of the safety net. And for me, this is kind of personal. My son and daughter and their spouses are educators from kindergarten through high school. My daughter is an elementary school principal, has been for 14 years. She took Sandy Hook extremely hard. Could have been her building. So we put a lot of stress, and I've seen this with her, the stress and pressure on people like that, while we ignore the elephant in the living room, which is guns. I noticed there are at least 3 committees in the Congress now want to investigate the FBI in this mistake, and I'm sure everyone in the FBI, every employee from Director Wray on down is sick about this. But it does illustrate, I think, the tremendous pressure that's put on other things while we ignore the big problem of guns, particularly assault rifles.
Well, it sounds like you're not alone in saying that this morning. I want to turn back to Russia. The indictment goes into really incredible detail about the 2016 election, Russian interference, saying that the Russian operatives had begun traveling here to begin that in 2014, posing as political activists. You were the director of the National Intelligence at that time. What did you know about those operations, and why wasn't more done to stop it before it became a problem?
First point I'd make here is this is not the first time they've done things like this. We have records of their attempts to interfere in our electoral process going back to the 60s. So there's always been this sort of ambient level of Soviet or now Russian activity, involvement, and attempts to influence our election. When these things start, and this is typical tradecraft, they start innocent looking and passive. And so when a cell like this starts, it's fairly innocent looking. So I personally know I wasn't aware of this activity going back to 2014. We certainly became aware of what was going on in 15 and 16, no question about it. And I think what was a big revelation to me was never before have we seen an effort like this mounted by the Russians with the multidimensional nature of it and its aggressiveness and directness. This was unprecedented.
Before I let you go, I have to ask about a tweet sent out over the weekend by Rob Goldman, the vice president of Facebook ads, retweeted by the president, saying that he has seen all of the Russian ads and that he can say very definitively that swaying the election was not the main goal. True or false?
Well, it's false as far as I'm concerned, because there's no question what the Russians were trying to do. And whether he acknowledges it or not, certainly from the intelligence that were available to us in the last administration, as now validated by the depth and detail of this indictment, I don't think there's any question about clearly the Russians were trying to affect the election. They had actually three goals. First was simply to sow discord and discontent in this country, and unfortunately we're a good target for that right now. And secondly, to hurt Hillary Clinton, which starts with a strong personal animus that Putin has for the Clintons, both. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, as things evolved, to support Trump. And they did that fairly well. And they're going to continue to do it.